It is my honor and privilege to live and work in the Akwaan Ani. I thank our hosts, the Akwaan, and I hope that I am a good guest. Gunesh Chish. Ree makes quilts that tell of climate change and its impact on the Alaskan landscape. She makes her quilts with custom printed fabrics. The fabric features images and designs she has collected and created over her art career. She combines these fabrics and quilts, each piece with intricate designs, an understanding of the world an understanding of the natural world that she infuses into her work. Ree has collaborated with scientists across many disciplines to deepen her understanding of this place she has called home for over 60 years. She lived near Denali Park for over 50 years and currently lives in Fairbanks, Alaska. She has an extensive resume of group and solo shows that have been shown in Alaska and all across the country. Her work is showcased in multiple publications and public collections. In 2006, she was a Denali National Park Artist in Residence. In 2012, she received the Interior Alaska Mayor's Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Arts. In 2020, she was awarded a Rasmussen Individual Artist Grant. In 2023, her quilt Spruce Smoke was selected by the U.S. Global Change Research Program for inclusion in its 5th National Climate Assessment, an assessment considered the premier analysis of climate change submitted to the White House and Congress. Her solo show, Sharing the World I Know, will be on exhibit at the Alaska State Museum through March 15th. Ree, thank you for being here today.
Thank you all for being here. It's so wonderful. I got a phone call from Jackie announcing that I'd been selected for a solo show, and it's been so much fun to plan which pieces to put in my show, and I've made some new ones to add. The museum staff here has been just incomparable in helping me, before the show to know what to do, and they've hung my show beautifully, and it's just a real honor to be here.
Microphone.
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. I apologize. I was told. So I'd like to tell you a bit about my evolution as an artist today. My work forms a continuum, changing and evolving over time. Everything I have done in the past influences what I do today in some way. Each new thing I learn inspires the next piece I make. I love learning how to do something that allows me to express an idea that has not been possible before. I have a degree in art education from the University of Minnesota with a concentration in woodcuts, intaglio printing, and botany. I came to Alaska in 1964 to work for the summer at Camp Denali, a remote lodge on the west end of Denali National Park. I met my husband that summer. He had built a log cabin on the east end of the park, Lincoln log style. It was hauled through the park, and he came out on his weekends to put it together. And the gals I worked for, Jenny Wood and Celia Hunter, some of you may recognize those names, they were looking for a volunteer to help, and so I volunteered. Well, Bill and I got married the following summer, and I spent 50 years of my life living on the east end of the park, and we raised 2 sons. I've always been interested in the natural world. My husband, Bill, he came as a ranger to the park in 1948, and then he was the first naturalist the park ever had in 1952. This is the view out our picture window. We had, our home was right on a little tundra pond. Here's another view of it here. So we felt very close to the outside world. We were looking out our window all the time. We watched the seasons change. Many of the wildlife that lived in our area would cross our lake at times. They were easier to see in the winter, outlined by snow. But so I've always been interested in the natural world. I've become pretty competent in a variety of media over the years, and I'd like to share some of this work with you and show you how it affects what I do today. The first artwork that I did when I came to Alaska was to make very representational drawings of plants. With my background in botany and my background in printing, I did very representational drawings, not as a final artwork, but that I would use as reference. And I would take these kinds of notes. They weren't beautifully executed, but the colors were accurate in case I wanted that information when I was going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do, but that was just how I worked at that point in time. So my neighbor Liz Berry taught me to silkscreen. I had a printing background, but I'd never silkscreened before. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I made limited edition silkscreen prints for about 10 years. And they were editions of around 100 of them. And I'll show you a few of these here. And this one, I produced a full series that the Alaska Conservation Society used as if you donated so much money, you got a free print kind of thing. And they use it on the cover of their review. This is an immature boreal owl, and there was an owl new stamp, conservation stamp thing that came out, and it was featured in that along with a drawing by Bill Berry. So I was in very good company back then. And at that time I got really sick from the solvents that I cleaned my screens with from the fumes, and I had to quit. And honestly, it was so difficult. I grieved. I had ideas in mind. I was competent enough at this that I could think ahead to, 4, 6, 8 transparent layers, how I was going to develop the image. It was hard. So what I did, I took some drawing classes from David Pasalacqua. He was a teacher at Pratt and Parsons in New York City, Joan Kimura in in Anchorage, taught a class in the way he taught, and I found out about him. And so I went down to where he had a studio in Orlando, Florida, for 5 two-week sessions. And the first week we would draw the nude, and we had someone up on a dais, and we'd be down on our hands and knees. He had us drawing with our left hand. It was the most amazing thing. The second week we'd go out to Disney World, and he would assign us different places at Disney World, which had elements that he thought would be helpful in our growth at that point in time. So I don't have anything from that, but what I learned from him is, I've used it all my life. It's affected everything I've done. And I also had a dog team at this point in time, and I got a spinning wheel and learned to spin. And I made yarn with that, and I purposely, use guard hairs. It was nothing you'd make clothing with, but and then I made these patterns. This is a bark beetle pattern. I'll be talking about bark beetles later. So I was using it way back then, and my husband did the wood parts of my pieces, and we did wall sculptures, and there were probably about 50 of them. This is an example of another one which doesn't have as much as wood in it as the other pieces. But so I'd been working very small, very work-intensive kinds of things that took a lot of time with natural colors. My sister had tried to get me to quilt several years earlier, and I said, I am not going to cut up perfectly good fabric and sew it back together again. So she's had me eat those words for quite some time now. And anyhow, so what's not to like about having all the color you want and all the scale you could possibly want? So this is the first thing that I ever worked on. My mom, sister, and I did this quilt. My son started a desktop publishing business at that time, and this was his logo. And so we created this, and it's a technique called color wash. And you cut mostly printed fabric up into 2-inch pieces, and then you can blend them, from light to dark. And it's a specific way of working with fabric. So I went back to Denali Park, and I had been teaching a drawing class, and the adult education person came up to me and said, would you teach another class? I said, my mom's health is not very good. I can't do that right now. Teach a short class. I said, well, I can teach quilting. I've never quilted, ever. But I know how to do this technique called color wash. So my mom and sister had pieces that they did in a class, and I started this, the center part, and had the class, and people really liked it. Well, then I had to learn to do all those stars, because I knew I wanted to do something else. So I learned those stars, And there was enough interest in the class that I taught another class, a few weeks later. Well, I'd already finished this, so I had to make another one, right, so that it could be in progress. And so that's how I got launched into quilts. And I've been solidly into quilts, ever since. I immediately started taking classes. I went outside and took classes from a lot of national artists to find out how they work with fabric. This is the color wash technique, is how I developed the salmon. And the background was it was a bed quilt technique called strip sizzle, but I used the rectangles and moved the colors around and so on. And so everything that I learned knew I would take into a piece as I went along. And this is another technique, paper piecing, where you draw the whole thing out on paper. And so I was just learning everything I possibly could about that. So let's see. I've got to figure out where I am here. Okay. In 1995, I took a class from Nancy Crow, and if any of you are quilters, she's legendary, and she taught the most revolutionary way of working with fabric that anybody had ever heard of. She had you come with like 25 or 30 yards of fabric, all solid colors. You had a rotary cutter and no ruler, nothing. You just cut and sewed. You had no idea where you were going, what you were going to do, how it was going to end up. Well, I worked like that and made some fairly abstract pieces solidly for 4 years, and then I had an idea that I'd do, but so I'll kind of show you. This is one of the first pieces that I did. This is a quilt block that I called my Y block, and I did what I called a Y series, and this is one. And this piece is Drifting Forms, and it's in the permanent collection of the Alaska State Museum in Fairbanks. I went on to do even more abstract kind of pieces. This one is Emerging from the Embers, and it's in the permanent collection of the Museum of Arts and Design in New York City. This is another piece that I particularly like that I made during these large ideas. This one here is another one that I particularly like, and all of the fabrics in there were fabrics that I made. I was learning other people's techniques, but I also was taking classes to dye fabric, surface design, and then I was taking those incrementally. As I would learn one thing, I'd put it in my next quilt. So things kind of changed gradually over the years. This is a piece of surface design. The landscape is to the south of Polychrome Pass, and I did a lot of printing and stamping and painting to create the mountains and the landscape part, which I then cut up and put it in a pieced kind of thing. This piece right here, I lived in Denali Park. The first 7 years, the only way to get to Fairbanks was by train, but after the road opened, it was 135 miles to get groceries, to go see the doctor, and so on. So I saw a lot of Nenana, and Nenana is wetlands in every direction. And I was really inspired. The Homer Museum had a Going with the Flow show that they were doing, and I was invited to be part of it. And so this is what I produced for that. In the small section up at the top, I painted those skies and the trees in. The right here, this was a new fabric, and I would take a piece of canvas and take a clear paint with no color in and coat it, and then put paint on top of it, and then take a scraper or a credit card, and I would carve out the designs that you see here. And so it was a new way of working. The main fabric up here was an immersion dyed piece where you fold it or crumple it in a certain way, and you can get these wonderful colors. And I have to admit, that piece isn't mine. A really close friend of mine made it, but it was so perfect for this. As you go through Nenana in the spring, the irises are just gloriously beautiful, and I have a close-up here. It's really hard to see. I've quilted iris flowers in here, and you cannot pick that out. My son started photographing my work in 2017. He is a photographer, unbelievable, and you would be able to see those if he had done this. So you're stuck with what I can show now. But he not only has photographed my work, he's made so many things possible for me. When I start to talk about the digital things, I learned to work digitally by taking classes online. But once I kind of got a taste for it, anything I needed to know, I would go to Eric. And he was remarkably patient in teaching me how to do things. So I was artist in residence at Denali Park in 2006. As part, you would go out in the park and spend 2 weeks there, and then you would give them a piece for their permanent collection. And this is the one that I gave them for that. During that period of time, I started to work very representationally. You know, I kind of got away from making the large abstract quilts. I was very successful in showing them and so on, but I lived remotely. There wasn't really a place in Alaska to show them to people who would appreciate and understand them, and so I kind of backed off, and you can see where I've gone. And once I was an artist in residence, then, like I say, I started working representationally, and Denali Park advertised that they wanted a quilt for the Eielson Visitor Center, and I was accepted for that. And I chose to do the view that was just out the window at the park there. Many, I should say, of the visitors never get a chance to see the mountain from there. And so this is the view that you would see from there. And I went out to see the building as it was being built. There was 90 feet from the front door. It was a long building, and at the opposite end of that was the wall that this thing went on. And I wanted people to walk into the building, see something down at the end, and be drawn to go through the building to look at it. So I started out, I designed it, and my working wall would handle, oops, I hit the wrong one. I am so sorry. There. Okay, I could get this piece and these two pieces on my working wall, and I had to have a sheet of styrofoam off on the edge in order to get that on it. And I laid out exactly the pieces that I want, and I filled them in roughly with blue fabric for the sky, white for the mountain, you know, dark for the front range and so on. And I made a really important decision at that point. I had started being organic about how I develop my quilts at that time. You know, a lot of quilters will draw the design out, and then they'll just put the fabric in the spots and then once you get that all sewn together, you're done. Well, instead, I worked on this gradually over time. If you see these vertical stripes in here, those are seam lines. And so I decided that I was going to do everything in 6-inch strips. And I made units that I could put in those strips, and then I could arrange the units, I could move things around. And so I was making changes on a regular basis. About 2 months into the project, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun if I started over here in late winter and then went through spring and through summer and through fall, and here's late winter again. And so because I was, I could make those changes as I went, I could do that. All of the species that you see here are within a 1/4 mile of the Eielson Visitor Center. I didn't want it to look like a zoo. Many of the species in there are hidden. You can spend some time looking at it and find them. And I used every piece of information about making quilts that I knew at that time, and I learned a lot of new things because there were things I needed to be able to do. And so I've got a few things here I'll show you. Right here, I had never done the evenly gradated fabric that I needed for the sky, so I learned how to do that. I have watercolored, but watercoloring with dyes on fabric is not easy. So I spent well over a month just getting the clouds that I needed for what I wanted for this piece. This is how I figured out what species were going to go where. You can see I've got May, June, July, and August and September. And the blue flowers are on the blue strips of paper. There's pink for pink flowers. And on that strip of paper, on that rectangle, it shows you the first day that you would find that blooming in the park and the last day that you would find it. And so I could move this, it was a pin board, and I could move it, you know, across and kind of see. I wanted a nice flow, a nice spread of colors. So I selected the plants that I did by how they would go together like this. And so some plants, you know, I could use and some I didn't. This is how I developed the images for most, not all of them, but some of the pieces. I would make a pencil drawing first. I would do it in ink, sometimes on tracing paper. Then I would photograph it, and then I would put it into Photoshop, and I went in and carefully took all of the black pixels away, so I had a nice, crisp, clean design. And then I turned it into a silk screen, and you can make small screens called thermofaxes. And this right here is one of the small thermofaxes, and I'm dabbing some paint out on it. You can see the squeegee that I have there that I'm going to use to print the design on the fabric. I made a number of these panels, actually several dozen of them. I knew images that I thought that I was going to want to use, so I just made these to have them on hand so that I could pick and choose what I wanted. This gives you some idea what it looks like when I was developing it. There's a finished panel in the middle, and then I had all of these shades and patterns and so on of greens and so on. I had them all cut about 7 inches wide, and then I would fold them over, and I had to go out and buy straight pins 3 times because I ran completely out of straight pins. And you can imagine sewing this together. It was a chore. And I used soft horizontal lines to sew it together. I felt like it just enhanced the feeling of the landscape. So that was how I did that. I talked about wanting to have as many species as I could, but I didn't want them to stand out. If you're looking at the quilt, you'll see those little tips of the wings on the skyline of the ridge, and then you'll see the right in here is this golden eagle. And I put him in with paint sticks. I used a variety of different media. I used fabric paint, and in some instances, paint sticks work better. So there are all kinds of different techniques in here that I used when I thought that was best. When you're designing something big like this, and it's in process, trying to balance the whole composition is interesting. All of the bright, vivid colors are in fall, and in the spring, there's lots of things happening. So I used kind of dark greens, and I had some contrast and some, emphasis there, and I had to kind of reduce what was happening in the fall area. So I chose to draw, oops, I keep doing that, I am so sorry. I drew these things with thread with my sewing machine. And then once they were in, I took fabric paint and filled those areas with paint. Okay, and this is what the quilt looked like in the building. You walked in the front door, and this is about 25 feet into the building. They had pressed plants of the plants that were growing around Eielson there, and this is what it looked like at the far end of the wall. So after doing a big project like that, it was a full year of my life. It was fun to step back and do some smaller things. So I just did some small landscapes, that just experimenting. Again, I'm still learning new kinds of things to do, and so I'll just show you some of these things that I worked on. And this one right here, it has some really interesting fabrics that patterns that it works in the landscape, but when you get to looking at it close, there's all kinds of really little fun things in there. And I like that kind of thing in my work. So this is a technique called deconstructed silk screening. You make your silk screen out of thickened dye. And when you put it on, it comes on in different thicknesses. You dry it completely, you lay it on your screen, you take the thickener that you would put color in, but you start out with clear, and you bring it across the screen, and where the dye is really thin, it soaks up the moisture right away, and that's what prints. Well, you move it over here, and there's some areas that there's not much dye left. So eventually, you just are getting these nice little thin lines around these thicker areas, and you have no idea from one time to the other what you're going to get. It is just so fun to work with. And here's a close-up where you can see these lovely little lines around here. But of course, and the thickened dye here is blocking any paint. So the paint is going in these open areas. This is where the dark purple was to start with. And there's these open, and so you have to think about what color you want there. So you're looking at it, and you've got to go stir some paint, and it's really fun. It's exhilarating. It's like flying by the seat of your pants kind of thing. And I really like that process. So I got involved with an ITOC program in Fairbanks in Time of Change, and they had a show, an early show that I didn't get in on, but I found out about it, and I started out. I was involved in the Envisioning the Future, the Art of Fire, Tropic Cascades, Microbial Worlds, and Boreal Forest Stories, and I didn't put it on there, but in 2024 we had Boreal Echoes. And so I've been involved in all of those. And the premise of this program is that you get accepted into the show, and then you work with scientists for 1 or 2 years. And a particular subject, like, the art of fire, we work with fire scientists to find out what's happening in our world. And at the end of that time, every artist makes a piece or two for the show that's affected by what you've learned for the last year or so. And this is a piece that I did for Art of Fire. It was a steep learning curve. I wanted to tell stories, I wanted to explain, what I was talking about, and you had to have fabrics to do that. And so I had to learn what it was I needed to make, and have lots of examples. In this one, I'm actually introducing the element of time. You've got the center that's a blazing, burning fire, and it's set inside, where the fires come through. It's a smoldering ash with still smoke in the air. And then I put an insert of the underground here, and that kind of gives you a glimpse of the future. When spruce tops are killed, the roots, they die at the top. Birch trees and some will send up shoots and so on, but spruce don't. So I just, block this off because they're not going to contribute to what comes next. If the fire, depending on how hot the fire is, there are oftentimes seeds that are still viable underground, and I put those in with seed stitches of different colors, and those different species will be what populates that area when the vegetation regrows. So I kind of try to tell a story of what's happening. And this just gives you a close-up of what it looks like up close. You can see how I developed some of the smoke by emphasizing these white lines around the edge and so on. So I do a lot of what happens with my quilting. I always have a nice thing to start with, but my quilting does a tremendous amount to enhance what I do. And here you can see, and I am embroidered these little burning embers things in here too. I don't use embroidery a whole lot, but every once in a while there is just no way to do it that will work as well as that. So you'll see that occasionally in my work. So this was a really exciting project that I started on. Give me just a second. I was part of a group of artists who formed to support and encourage each other's work, and we called our group Elements. We decided as a group to respond to some music. There is a program that happens annually in Denali National Park called Composing in the Wilderness, and composers come, they spend a week in the park, or maybe it's a shorter time, then they seclude themselves for a couple days and write an original composition. and then it's taken to musicians who learn the music in a short period of time, and there's a concert in Denali Park, and there's one in Fairbanks. And Stephen Lias, who is the person who runs that program, he got the music to us right away. There were 9 composers and 6 of us, and so each one of the 6 of us made 3 pieces to go in the show, and that gave us 18 pieces. Each of the composers had 2 pieces that that responded to the music. And it was kind of terrifying, because these were kinds of music that I'd never, ever listened to before. And so I've got my stash of fabrics, lots of experimental kinds of things. I pulled all of that out, one by one. I went and I looked at this. Does this make me think of that piece of music, or does it that piece of music? And I ended up with 3 batches of fabric on the wall. And it kind of gave me something to think about. And then, of course, I can't tell you how many times I listened to those pieces of music, and I thought about, the flow. What was I seeing? What was I thinking? And so on. And anyhow, this is one of the pieces that I did, and another one, and a third one. I actually had all of these pieces of fabric made. I had to make fabric for the first 2. But this person was telling the story of the end of the world, as, just Armageddon. And it started out with two sticks knocking together, and she had an Athabascan drum made specially for her, and that was used in the program. And then it ended up with this cacophony of sound. And so that was how I kind of described what she was talking about. And if you are all interested in this, if you go to my website, there's a link there that will take you to the Composing in the Wilderness website, and it'll show you pictures of us. You can listen to the music while you're looking at the art, that's been responded to. And we were tickled. The museum here in Juneau has accepted that whole show into their permanent collection, which is really pretty special. Okay, so then, Jackie already mentioned that I got a Rasmussen grant for individual artists in 2020, and I proposed to them to make a series of climate change quilts, and I wanted to make them big. And here's the first one that I did. It's Selkirk sheefish. There is, in the Selkirk River in northern Alaska, on the mountainside, it had rained for days, and the permafrost melted, and a whole massive amount came down the mountain and right into the river and formed that delta that you see there. And of course, the river had to go around it, and there's silt all over everywhere. And over here on this, this right here, there's a column of clear water with very healthy sheefish. Over here is a column with sediment in it, and I've got ghost fish here. Ray Hander, who was the person that I talked to about his research and got me interested in the project, he knew someone in Whitehorse that photographs underwater fish, and he had some underwater photographs of sheefish, and he gave me permission to use them, as a resource for making. So I actually have pretty nice looking fish, which wouldn't have happened otherwise. And here's a close-up where you can see what that looks like. I actually used some netting for the ghost fish. This is the next piece, the spruce bark beetles, and it shows the invasion in a spruce forest, the trajectory across a year. Here they're coming in with perfectly healthy trees. The larvae of these insects eat underneath the cambial layer, and they produce these incredibly beautiful designs. And I'm sorry, I just haven't used this often enough to. Anyhow, here's some of those designs in these 2 pieces of fabric, and I've quilted some of the designs in here. And as they go along, They kill the spruce trees, which their needles all turn tan and brown. Sometimes the needles fall off. Lots of times they're just, waiting for a spark to ignite. And as the trees die out, the bark beetles also, dwindle. And I've shown them kind of turning into ghost images at the end. So that's the cycle. And the bark beetles are moving up in the state. They were just about to Cantwell when I did this piece. But at this point in time, which is 3 years later, my home at Diniki Lakes, when you look out that picture window, every single tree, all the way to the base of Carlo, is brown. They're dead. It's just, it is unbelievable to have watched that happen. Okay, this is another piece that I did at Creamer's Field in Fairbanks. The spruce forest there has grown on permafrost, and the spruce roots go out radially. And as the permafrost melts, the trips, the trees tip over, as does all of the underbrush, and it's an impenetrable mass. You really can't get through it. And these little hollows form in here of water as things dip down, and they keep filling with more water. Well, in there are one-celled organisms that are producing greenhouse gases, and so they are, producing these molecules up here. And just for decorative purposes, I've put molecules of the most prolific greenhouse gases: methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide.
Is that called the drunken forest?
Well, in Denali Park, they have areas where the trees are everything, and that's what they call it, is the drunken forest, because as things melt, they go in every direction. You're right. So this shows you the Denali Park polychrome pass, where the road has sloughed off. The road's been closed to the west end of the park for 3 years now. And my Seasons of Denali quilt was out in the visitor center out there, and we were able to get that out of there, and they've given it to me. I've cleaned it, I'm storing it for them, but they're also allowing me to have it in the show here, which is nice. At the moment, they are building a bridge across this right here. That's hoped to be done in 1927. But the geologist that just transferred out of the park talked about how he anticipated that all of the permafrost was going to be gone in Denali Park in 2050, which is coming pretty quickly. And he said right now he was able to cite 140 sites along the Denali Park Road that's going to be impacted with permafrost thaw. So we have good times ahead of us, don't we? And here's a close-up, just like I have done in Seasons of Denali. Here, this little guy, the pica, this is a golden eagle's nest. Over here is a grizzly. I embed, these are the animals whose life is being impacted while the bridge is being built right now. Okay, this is the view out my living room window, and it depicts 50 years of change. If you look at it and don't know the area, of course, there's no way you know what's going on. But I depict 50 years ago on the left with what's happening right now. Right up in this portion of Carlo Mountain, a huge chunk of the hillside just came down. We went to Fairbanks one day, and we came back in the evening, and we looked out at the lake, and right about in half, on the left there was clear water, and on the right it looked like chocolate milk. So we got the binoculars out, and we could see where it had come down off the mountain. All of that silt got all the way to here, and that continues to filter in. And so here you can see I've got practically no sediment on the bottom, and has increased. The depth of the water, 50 years ago, a cow moose would almost have to swim across. She was up, the water was above the bottom of her belly, and 2 calves swimming behind her had to swim because it was so deep. A cow moose can stand in the middle of that pond right now and be in ankle-deep water. At times. It's a little fuller in the spring. We used to have these big flocks of migrating birds that would come in the spring and just rest. So it's a small pond now. It doesn't happen anywhere near as often. I've got, these are ghost redneck grebes, because we used to have big flocks of those come. We no longer have diving ducks that can live on the lake. They're all puddle ducks. We still have some. The swans still come. Here you can see they really had to scramble and get way down deep with their butt in the air. Over here you can see they just kind of lean over and eat. It's just so shallow. And there was no sedge mat along the edge of the lake when I first got there. Now there's this massive big shelf that's come out of sedge, and then there's this equisetum here beyond it. So the lake has changed considerably. My husband, Bill, he discovered the property, he staked it, and he surveyed it. And he said, I knew that this was a tundra pond, and eventually it would become a meadow. But he said, never in my wildest dreams did I think that I was going to be able to see that happen before I died. So, and this is a close-up, so you can just kind of see what the thing looks like up closer. Okay, so I talked to you about working digitally. The other part of my Rasmussen grant was to buy an iPad Pro and take a couple classes on the internet to learn how to design digitally. And it has changed what I do way beyond what I could ever have imagined. I got a taste of it, but as I mentioned, my son Eric is the one that has made what I do possible now. And I'm going to try to show you a little bit. What I do is really complicated, but this is gives you a taste of what I'm doing. I'm working mostly with my own fabric. Well, I'm working with all my own images, and I'm trying to include some of these. I've got lots of fabric on hand. I did really fun, interesting experiments with fabric, and then I didn't use them. So I can take those out, iron them carefully, and I can bring those into my design. So everything that I've done over the years, I can do now. I can bring into my work. So here's gives you an idea how that goes. Here you can see the finished piece on the left. And up here, this is a immersion dyed piece that I did. And I have used that, underneath this. This is a similarly colored thing, but it's a little different. And then this is a photograph that I took of paint on the side of the building that's cracked and so on. And I made an image, a black image from that. And you can see I was able to use it as a stamp up here on top of what I had underneath. And then in here where I had a black thing, I was able to take that out so you could have that pattern to look through at what's going on underneath. And then I had 4 of my bark beetle drawings that I, put around where I wanted them to be. And I showed you this image earlier because that was a drawing that I did in 1965. Well, I have done a series of, I think 5 fireweed quilts using that drawing. And this is one of them, and this is another one. So I can, use these ideas that I had, but never been able to bring to fruition, so to speak. This was a project I took on this summer. I call this Denali Weather 100 Years. The National Park at Denali was celebrating 100 years of collecting weather. And the reason it happened was because the rangers would get up in the morning and water and feed the dogs, and then they'd record the weather. So Pam Susanis is a scientist from Denali, and she's the one, she pretty single-handedly made this whole thing happen because she said, this is something we need to celebrate. She was located at Denali for a while. She's in Fairbanks now, but she deals with the weather data of all of the northern national parks in Alaska. And so she wanted to have someone make a commemorative piece for this project. And she came to me, and I was initially going to say, I'm too busy. I've got these shows I'm planning for. But my husband was a ranger in 1948 to the early 1950s, and he took some of that data. And so I just had to be involved in it. And it was a really fun project to work on. She organized a symposium on the 23rd of August, which is when we celebrated it, where scientists came and talked about the research that they were doing. Some of it hadn't even been published, so it was really new kind of information. She had an art show out in the lobby of the visitor center, and Bonnie Brooks, who does weavings and teaches, she brought a bunch of small little weavings from her students who had learned to weave using weather data. And so those were in the lobby. And then there were some knitters from Denali. There's a national program called a Tempestry program, and they had gotten yarns from that program, but they'd used Denali weather, and so they had those hanging. It was such a fun day. And so I tried to include as much weather data in this as I possibly could. Each one of those vertical stripes represents one of the 100 years. The blue colors up there are the coldest day of the year for that year. The green is and the darkest is the coldest. So you can see it was darker years ago, and it's lighter at the right end. And the green data is the average temperature for the entire year, winter and summer. And again, the dark greens are the coldest temperatures, and then they get warmer to the right. And you can see over here, there's weathers that the temperatures are much warmer than they ever have been. These are 3 dogs that are in the Denali kennels right now. A friend of mine who's running the kennels sent me the photographs that I could use. And this is Dargo on the left, and his is the darkest green, and he represents the temperature from 1950 to 1975. The average daily temperature was 26. Next is Gus, and he's the next lightest. He represents the temperature from 1975 to 2013, and the average temperature is 28. And Nipa on the far side there, she's the lightest, and she represents from 2013 till now, and that's 30 degrees. Once the average temperature gets up to 32, they predict that the permafrost in the park is going to melt. And we know where that's going to happen. So anyhow, and I had a really fun. It was interesting to design this. So, I'm about done. Okay, these I'll just quickly go through these. I do climate change pieces now, and this one happens to be a burned forest. Outside, I called it Yankovich Burn. It was a fire that burned in Fairbanks, and these are some really fun, unusual fabrics that I was able to use, so I won't go into any more detail. This is another one. This one was inspired by the rock slide in Polychrome Pass, and this is another piece. I guess I was going to tell you, I'll just quickly tell you, sometimes when I get a digital image from the printers, I want to tell you too, I order my fabric from a place called Spoonflower, and you can send the images to them to be printed in like fat quarter sections of data. And so if my piece is too big, I send, I break it apart into pieces, send it off, and they bring it back. They send it back to me, and then I sew it together, put the bottom layer down and the batting and the quilted layer on top, and then I pin it, at 2 to 3 inch intervals, and then I do all of the quilting on top. Sometimes, I'm new at this, and I thought I knew what it looked like. And so, this piece, in order to resolve this piece, I had to add this blue up here and this blue down here from my stash. And then these tree trunks weren't right there. So with everything that I've learned over the years, I can take these pieces and I can resolve them. And it's a fun challenge. I am having the best time doing this. Honestly, I keep saying, if you have this much fun, it should almost be illegal. Okay, that's it.
Where on earth do you get this energy, Ree? You're amazing.
I guess I'm just lucky. But I have to tell you, what I do has been supported by so many people. My husband supported me back when we didn't have any money. I could do all of these things. He didn't insist that I make money what I do. My son Eric, I could not do what I do without his help now. When I was doing the Denali, Seasons of Denali quilt, friends brought food so that I could work the last month because I had this deadline. And they gave, information about what's going on out there, what species should be there. My son drove out to work at the west end of the park for years, and he came in one day and he says, "Mom, what's that Jaeger doing up there?" He says, "You never see him up there." So I relocated that right fast. So I've had, so many people that have impacted what I have done so many times. And right now, I've been working digitally, what's it been, for maybe 3 years. I am doing work that I really am not capable of, but it's something that I need to know, and I go to Eric, and Eric is amazing. And I just say, "Eric, this is what I need to do." So he teaches me. And I sit down, and he's given me this much information, and I said, "Stop. I am so on overload." "Oh, Mom, this is logical." Right? So we go out to here. Well, on a computer, you go step A, B, C, and if you don't know D, you are toast. And so I'll go back and ask him again. And every once in a while, he'll say, "We've done this 2 or 3 times before." But he will calmly go on and teach it to me again. And so I learn what I need to know. But if you ask me anything tangential, I don't know it. And so I'm blessed. I would not be able to do this without his input. And each time I've been able to make a big jump forward, it's because he's helped me. So, we're blessed in our life, aren't we?
So your mediums have changed a lot over your lifetime.
It has.
Printing and
at one
and
point
quilting.
when I was doing, some new work, I said, I don't know where this is coming from. It's so different. And I had a really close friend, and she says, "I can see a thread of all, through all of your work." Well, at that point, I couldn't. But, looking back now, I can see each one stretched me out in a different direction. But I have pretty much been on the same path, even though it wandered way off at times.
I guess my question is, since you've learned this digital technology recently, what's next for your artwork? Do you see yourself, any seeds of curiosity pulling you into a new medium?
I will never run out of ideas. But I have already signed up to take a dye class next year in November, because I tell you, I have to make these units to be able to tell a story, and I can pull fun, interesting pieces off my shelf. And you've seen examples here towards the end of ones that I've just pulled these fun things to work with, and I can, work with color and so on, and those are fun. But if I'm talking about a serious piece, I'm going to need to be making new units, and I will always fuel some of that with learning new ways of doing it. So I hope I last as long as my ideas do.
There's a wonderful show at the Juneau Arts and Humanities Council by an artist who used all kinds of natural materials to make beautiful dye colors that you would love to see, probably, if you got the chance.
I would, although I have to tell you that when I was first starting out, I experimented with natural dyes, and they are not archival. And I have done everything in
Well,
my
yeah.
power to use only archival kinds of things. And one of the incredible things about the digital thing that I'm doing now, you send it to Spoonflower and it comes back. I took a piece of fabric and I put it in my window for 2 years facing the sun, and I had it covered with a 3x5 card stapled together. And at the end of 2 years, you could not see the difference from what was covered, and that's not true of quilts. Sadly, many of the colors are fugitive. And I have done and one of the reasons for that is when I was selected to do the Seasons of Denali piece, Scott Carley, here from Juneau, called the National Park Service and said, I have just looked at some public art, and the fabric pieces have not held up well. If the artist is interested, I'd like to talk to her. So I talked on the phone with him for an hour and a half. Carol Harding was with us, and she's the one that designed the Eielson Visitor Center. And I knew some of the things Scott told me, but I made some changes in order to make my thing as archival as possible. But he set the seed. Carol Harding saw to it that the skylight above the quilt was coated, and they had, machines that recorded, the light coming in on it. So now it hung for 16 years, and you really can't see much difference in it at all. So they've, because of Scott, that piece has really been taken care of well.
She clearly states that her stuff is going to go.
Yeah,
and
right.
But she did
right.
a lot of beautiful hard work to get what she's got, and so she's.
And I think it's beautiful. I do, but I wasn't willing to go there.
They're gorgeous colors.
Yes. Oh, I know. I agree.
I didn't have time to see the whole exhibit last night, but I think the other room, the installation, is yours also?
No.
It is not. Okay, I was
But
so that is so different. I was going to ask about it.
It is a magnificent thing. The concept of that is it requires time to look at, and boy, I highly recommend. It's such an interesting thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I definitely see the line of printmaking through all of this work that you've done and on your fabric, and
Yes.
I think that fabric is a wonderful medium to accept, just layer upon layer upon layer, which is what I see and admire so much in your work. And I'm wondering if you could just talk about, like, fabric has so many other properties, and there's so many different types of fabric, sheer or heavy or thick or shaggy. So there's a lot of textileness, but I don't necessarily see so much of that in your work. And I just wonder if that's a place that you would go, or just if you might talk more about your transition from silkscreen to fabric, which is really a different feel.
I'm not always logical when I make these decisions. And when my sister suggested I might like, quilting, I launched into it, and it was after I had become a quilter for a while that I was told that I could silkscreen on fabric. And it's not the same as what I did before. What I did before was carefully registered, on top of the other, and you don't do that with fabric. But I am truly a printmaker. I dabbled in watercolor, and I really got pretty good at it, but I was bored. And I like, like you say, working with printed images. I like putting two colors up against each other and just experimenting to see what they look like. I can't think like that in my mind. I can't imagine those two colors and put them down. And so part of my process is organic, and I discover these things as I go, and then I take in what I find to be useful. And I have thought about, using other fabrics and so on. I have colored some silk and some transparent things and so on, but so far I just haven't gone there. I've had enough ideas going with what I know how to do, and maybe if I live another 50 years, maybe I will.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
It's interesting that you went from very, your botanist scientific work to very abstract, and now you're going back into a much more representative type. I mean, I see this really interesting I don't know, mingling of something very representational and what I find it interesting about quilt work, which is that it really lends itself to abstraction. And I just, if you want to say anything more about that, I'd love to hear it.
I loved making those big abstract quilts. They were fun, but I lived remotely, and I didn't have an audience that appreciated it, really. I mean, I have a quilt in New York, in the Museum of Art and Design. It's a big deal. I probably had a possibility, but Alaskans weren't ready to look at that kind of art. I lived remotely. Where do you ship it? Who sees it? And I didn't have a whole lot of money back then. We really skimped along, and shipping things out was expensive then, not like now. And so I just pulled back and did other things that were fun.
Hi, this has been fascinating. My question to you is, do you enjoy working with parameters, like having to react to music, that type of thing, or do you enjoy just doing what you like to do most?
I like it all. Working within parameters, it forces me to do something that I never would have thought of doing on my own. I did have one commission from hell, and that person knew exactly what he wanted it to look like. If you give me a reasonable set of parameters, I have fun with it. But I have learned to be very careful when I take things on, to be sure that I'm going to have enough latitude to find something that will fit with what they want, but it will also allow me to, have some artistic license.
Ree, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for coming. It was very fun.